specific event. Abrasions? Yes.
And am I correct when I say compression abrasions are essentially when direct pressure from a blunt object together with slight rubbing movements produce skin and epidermal crushing? Is that what your understanding of the term is?
Yes, sir.
And you're familiar with patterned abrasions?
I am, yes.
And patterned abrasions are injuries that show a distinct pattern that may reflect the shape of the impacting blunt objects that you may see with reference to injuries that are left by that blunt object. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Now, as far as in general terms, from what you reviewed, at any point in time did you look at a state police reconstruction report?
I don't believe that I did, no, sir.
You weren't provided with that, is that correct?
That's correct, I don't believe so.
You weren't provided with any sort of forensic reports, DNA or anything like that, is that correct?
I don't believe so, no, sir.
You never actually looked at the physical car, is that correct?
I did not, that's correct.
Are you aware that the physical car, being the defendant's car, is still in law enforcement custody and available for inspection if you would want it to? Are you aware of that?
I think I'm aware of that, yes, sir.
But you never made that request, is that correct?
That was not necessary in this case to inspect the vehicle.
Whether it's necessary or not, you didn't make that request, correct?
I don't remember if we made that request or not. We obviously didn't look at the vehicle, but it wasn't necessary in this case.
Did you ever look at the actual taillight pieces or the taillight housing, is that correct?
Not the actual, we looked at photographs of the evidence, yes.
Now, the injuries that you observed or reviewed in materials in regard to Mr. O'Keefe were primarily on the right side of his body, is that correct?
Well, sir, on the right arm, in the posterior aspect of the right arm, yes. And then the skull fracture was a little bit to the right, the occipital fracture.
Also bruising on his right hand, is that correct?
There was bruising on the back of his right hand, yes.
The dorsal aspect?
Yes, correct.
And there was also bruising on sort of the posterior of his right knee, is that correct?
There was a small bruise, I believe, yes, sir.
Now, with respect to, within your report, you talk about the numerous linear abrasions on the posterior of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm and forearm, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in relation to those injuries, there's a sentence in which you or whoever authored this part of the report, assuming it's you, indicate that furthermore, any such injuries would be highly improbable if Mr. O'Keefe was wearing a jacket, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that Mr. O'Keefe was not wearing a jacket other than a long sleeve sort of hooded shirt?
I believe that came to light afterwards. Again, it doesn't affect my actual opinions in this case, but it was a sentence added in there, yes, sir.
And so, also within your report, same paragraph, you indicate blood and DNA transfer would also be highly probable under such circumstances, none of which were reportedly found on the tail lamp assembly or any of the fractured pieces, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that DNA consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe was actually found on the tail light housing from the defendant's vehicle?
I'm aware after we wrote or issued the report that it became known to us that I believe DNA was tested and some DNA was found, I believe a small amount. I don't believe any blood evidence was located or found on.
Some DNA evidence. Let me ask you, sir, does it matter how much DNA of a fallen officer is found on that taillight housing? Would it matter if it's a large amount or a small amount inside the taillight housing, sir? Oh, that wouldn't change your opinion? Really? Why would you write a fucking sentence that said that then, sir?
Any pieces, but there was indication of DNA on the taillight housing.
There was also DNA matching Mr. O'Keefe that was found on the exterior of a piece of drinking glass that was found right near his body.
I believe so, yes, sir.
And there was also pieces of approximately 16th of an inch by 16th of an inch of clear and red plastic that was subsequently found to be consistent with the defendant's taillight that was found embedded within Mr. O'Keefe's shirt.
Within the shirt, I believe, yes, sir. Not his actual body.
And so this is all things that you found out after you issued your report in February of 2024, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Now, when you were talking about the injuries to the back of the head of Mr. O'Keefe, consistent with coming in contact with a hard surface, correct?
Yes, sir.
Would that hard surface include if the ground was frozen?
Well, you'd have to perform an analysis actually, because you'd have to determine how hard that ground was. You'd have to look at the freeze and thaw cycle, probably leading up to weeks of that. You can't just look at ground and say, well, it's below freezing, so that ground must be frozen. I mean, is it a possibility? It may be, but you have to go through an actual analysis and procedure to determine how hard that ground is and whether it could have produced those injuries.
Oh, did you do that, sir?
So it is something that's capable of being done by you, is that correct?
Performing that type of an analysis? You could go through and do it, sure, yeah.
But you didn't do it, correct?
No, I did not do it, no. Because, yeah, there's no need in this case. We don't know what happened in this case. There's no indication of...
Wow. Seriously. Listen to this. I cannot believe how many people think that this is credible testimony. It's not needed in this case? Let's see. A gentleman was found passed away in a yard with a horrible head injury, obvious hypothermia based on the pancreas color and the body temperature that they had to warm him up before they could even announce the fact that he'd passed away. But no, that's not necessary. We don't need to test that. All this taillight housing found in this gentleman, the taillight pieces found in his clothes at the hospital. Yeah, they were found in his clothes, not in his body. This is so ridiculous.
Certainly, it's not consistent with getting hit by the car and ending up where he did, even if the ground is somehow hard enough to cause that type of an injury. Again, there's no movement and no force to get his body over there.
Excuse me, sir. What information are you basing that expert opinion on? I want answers, Josh Levy. I want answers.
The damage with the car is inconsistent with him being struck by it. So whether the ground could cause it or not, the roadway could cause it, the curb could cause it, a back could cause it. There's numerous different possibilities.
A stampede of horses could cause it? Of course there's numerous causes. Now you're sounding like the medical examiner. We have a certain set of circumstances that we are investigating. If you want to contribute to that fucking investigation, then you damn well better look at those pieces of evidence in order to form your expert opinion. Otherwise, you're just shooting cannons in the fucking dark. What is the point of that? This isn't bring your child to work day and build a cannon to throw something at a car. What in the fuck is the point of that? A man was found in the yard. Taillight pieces were found in that yard. Taillight pieces were found in his clothes. It was snowing. It was freezing. The woman that dropped him off at that house has a broken motherfucking taillight. These are the set of circumstances, and these are the variables that need to be inputted into however you form your output, sir. Unbelievable.
And we don't really have enough evidence in this case to determine what one specific event actually caused that injury.
You didn't have enough evidence based on what you were provided, isn't that fair to say?
I didn't have enough evidence based on what I was provided, and even looking at the additional evidence that I became aware of after the fact, there's still no evidence. I mean, you can't deny the science and the physics as to what would have happened if he was struck by the vehicle. So anything past...
Really, this is unbelievable. This is totally unacceptable. You can't deny the science and the physics about a pedestrian being hit by a car. I would like to see all of your work. I would like to see if any case that you've investigated looks identical to the next, or how many variables need to be taken into consideration to form your expert opinion. You are so full of donkey doo. It makes me want to punch you in the throat. She took this man's life, and karma is a bitch.
That, you have to somehow overcome that hurdle, which is very difficult to do.
When was it that you looked at this additional material?
It certainly isn't that difficult to do when you are provided the evidence. And if you're not provided the evidence, I would think that you would ask. And if you did not ask, to me that seems like you were given some form of informal direction with a tip of a hat, if you will. Wink, wink, mofo. That is unacceptable.
We were informed after a report was issued that DNA was found And that was really the primary issue. I believe that some DNA was found on the housing, which, again, there's numerous explanations or ways that DNA can get on a light housing.
Let me ask you this, sir. With regard to the materials that you were provided with, was there anything in there that stated that Mr. O'Keefe's skull fracture on the back of his head was caused by contact with the tailor?
No, I don't believe there was anything in those materials that stated
Was there anything in those materials that indicated, or that anyone stated at any point in time, that Mr. O'Keefe's arm was outstretched at the time that he was struck by the vehicle?
No, sir, there wasn't.
Was there anything in there indicating that his arm was tucked in at the time that he was struck by the vehicle?
You know, there's no indication in any of that evidence of what he may or may not have been doing, how he may or may not have been positioned. I mean, that's the whole issue. There's no evidence to indicate what may have allegedly occurred in this case.
Now, a typical pedestrian collision that you...
That's the whole issue. That's right. That is the whole issue. And you know what you need to be able to figure that out? Evidence. Why did you not ask for the evidence? And why, when the Commonwealth tried to give you the evidence, did you not accept it based on the fact that the feds gave you a nod from Josh Levy? This is corruption.
See through the course of your work involves a pedestrian being struck by the front of a vehicle. Is that fair to say?
I see all types of different people getting run over backwards, cars spinning, hitting sideways. Frontal impacts certainly occur, yes, but we see pedestrians getting struck by all parts of the vehicle.
I'm sure you see all kinds. What I'm asking is predominantly when you see a pedestrian collision, the typical pedestrian collision would be a pedestrian crossing a road in front of a vehicle as it's approaching. Is that correct?
That's certainly not uncommon, yes, sir.
Now, as far as, I believe you described a little bit on your direct testimony, as far as there's differences in the type of injuries that you would expect or anticipate depending on how the vehicle interacted with the pedestrian in a pedestrian collision, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as far as, you're familiar with what's called a sideswipe collision?
Yes, sir, I am.
And am I correct when I say that in a typical pedestrian collision with pedestrian crossing in front of a vehicle, there are a number of different types of interactions as far as a rapid and forward projection versus a fender vault versus a number of different ways that a pedestrian can interact with the front of a vehicle, correct?
It depends on the position of the pedestrian and certainly the profile of that vehicle and the speed of the vehicle. Yes, sir. There's many different factors involved in it.
And so in a typical pedestrian collision, when a pedestrian is struck by the front of the vehicle, that involves more of an assumption of the velocity of the striking motor vehicle by the pedestrian than you would expect to see in a sideswipe collision, correct?
Well, I mean, yes, generally speaking, a sideswipe means that the person or the pedestrian in the vehicle don't obtain a similar or common velocity. So if you're standing in front of a car and it hits you, it's going to speed you up to that same speed and then disengage. The sideswipe means that there's not this mass-to-mass impact. By its very nature, sideswipe has minimal forces. We see it even between vehicles that just rub against each other. So if there's a sideswipe impact with a pedestrian in a vehicle, there's going to be very little damage to the pedestrian, and similarly, there's going to be very little movement. There's really no force at all acting. You know, for instance, if a car came and is...
Again, you are basing this off of what? If a car just didn't even hit you, it just whizzed by you, but it was a millimeter away from your arm? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. You're not going to have injuries from a car not touching you. Again, you need the actual evidence, which includes the condition that Officer John O'Keefe was in when they found him and brought him to the hospital. That's pretty important. And all of the data that was pulled from the car, all of the damage that was done to the car, the visibility on that street on that night, there's no lights, it's pitch black, and it's snowing. These are all things that you and I both know that you need to get up on that stand and make an expert analysis. Why in the frickin' world did you not ask for it?
Swipe by your arm, but didn't have enough force or enough contact to cause any damage, well, it wouldn't actually cause any movement of the person either. So a sideswipe by its very nature involves minimal impact, minimal forces, minimal velocities.
Also contained in the report that you at least co-authored, there's an indication that Mr. O'Keefe's injuries, at least to his skull, the fracture to his skull, are consistent with him having been pushed or possibly been impacted by the subject Lexus and fallen backwards, striking his head. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, so that's another possibility.
Sorry, sir, yes or no?
No, let him answer. Let him answer the question.
So if we're saying that there's enough force if you fall backwards to strike your head and cause that skull fracture, well, he could have slipped and struck his head. The car could have backed up and not known that he was there and nudged him and caused him to fall. I mean, any event that would cause him to fall backwards.
Or a stampede of horses could have ran him over down the street. Thank you, sir. We know there are lots of variables. Here's the set of circumstances that this particular case is based on. Figure it out. Oh, you're not going to ask for any of the circumstances? You're just going to build a cannon and have it fucking throw glasses at a taillight that you froze but didn't write that in your report, but yet all of the officers get crucified for not writing everything in their report. But for you, it's okay, right? Right? All FKR mongers. It's such hypocrisy, and it's so disgusting. I don't understand how y'all can sleep at night. Sleep with yourselves at night.
Obviously would result in him striking his head. So there's numerous, almost infinite possibility of different scenarios that could result in that type of an event.
Thanks.
Mr. Jackson?
Nothing further.
Okay. Dr. Wenchley, you are all set, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Jurors, I want to see counsel for the last time at sidebar right now.